Please welcome Tahira.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks. So, as Seth kindly said, my name is Tahira. Thank you to On the Revel for hosting this awesome event and for having us here. It's such an honor to be here. So, I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then I'm not actually going to click through slides. I might show you like 2, so don't worry. So, I started in cannabis. I've been in the space for about 5 years. I came in out of business school. My background is very boring. I was in finance, financial services, mostly here in New York. And right before I went to business school, I worked at a nonprofit in DC doing economic development. And I started to think more about how do you use private capital for social good? And what are the mechanisms for that? This was right after the housing market crashed, and I worked for a hedge fund that was part of that. So that was constantly like on my mind. So I went to business school to try to figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And in my second year of school, my grandfather was diagnosed with cancer. And so for me, that was the first time that I had someone so close to me in my life who was going through, well, one who had ever been diagnosed with cancer, but then seeing it so up close and personal. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people here who've gone through similar experiences and had exposure to cannabis that way. Which was a really eye-opening experience because I realized for the first time that cannabis was out there. Am I doing that? Cool. I hope you guys enjoy the presentation. Yeah, whatever. Thanks. Yeah, great. Sorry. We'll get back to that in a second. So, my grandfather had cancer, and as I think a lot of people do when somebody is suffering from cancer in their life, you start looking at alternative treatments. And for my grandfather, he had lung cancer. So we started looking at different, alternative medicines, homeopathic, natural, and you automatically, or pretty quickly, you come across cannabis as a treatment form for those who are suffering. It was terminal for him. We knew that he didn't have that much time, but we wanted to make sure that he was at least comfortable. And, my parents, Pakistani, Muslim, very traditional. So when I get a text from my mother asking me and my younger sister if we knew where to get marijuana, we were very confused. And my sister automatically called me, and she was like, "Do you think this is a trick?" And I was like, "I think we're a little too old to be tricked by our mom to see if we know where to get marijuana." But the answer was yes. We grew up in small-town Ohio. I knew a variety of cannabis dealers. But what struck me was that, one, my grandfather had lung cancer, so he wasn't going to smoke cannabis, obviously. But two, the stuff that I knew how to get was not a product that I was going to give to my grandfather, who was suffering from cancer, had a compromised immune system. And it made me realize that you have all these people all over the world who are suffering, and there's plenty of anecdotal evidence and now more and more research how cannabis has an impact on people who are suffering from cancer and a variety of illnesses. So that was really eye-opening to me. Then besides that, I started looking at the history of cannabis and trying to figure out, why is this even illegal in the first place? And for those of you, I'm sure a lot of people in here know the history, it made me so angry to understand that it was really politically motivated, economically motivated, and didn't really have anything to do with the plant. So, second year of business school, I'm at a point where I'm like, I really have to figure out what to do with my life. I have all this debt that's about to come due pretty soon. But I knew I didn't want to go into banking or consulting, which are very traditional paths. I wanted to do something that was going to have impact, and that was very entrepreneurial, but also use my previous finance and business experience. And I was really fortunate. I mean, it was pretty crazy that my grandfather passed away February 15th, 2014. February 16th, I was at my parents' house in Ohio, and I got a text from a friend of mine who had been a year ahead of me in business school, and he asked me if I had a job, and I was like, no. And he said, how do you feel about Seattle and marijuana? And I had forgotten that he had come across a very small startup when he graduated called Privateer Holdings, which for those of you who don't know, Privateer Holdings was one of the first cannabis-focused private equity firms. It was started by 2 alumni who went to the same business school I did. And at that time, they had just finished, after 18 months, raising their Series A, which was $7 million. And they were looking to hire people. And my friend was like, he did not know anything about what had just happened in my life with my grandfather. So it was really interesting timing that he'd reached out and said, what do you think about this job? So I turned to my parents and I said, hey, what do you guys think about Seattle and marijuana? And had we not just gone through that experience together, I think my parents would have had a very different viewpoint on it. But because of that and their understanding around how cannabis can actually be helpful for somebody suffering, they were like, this could be actually really interesting. And so that really started my journey into cannabis. Part of me was very nervous on coming out of business school. I'm like, is this career suicide? This was 2014. I had just gotten this very fancy degree that I still needed to pay for. But I also thought that this might be the most interesting thing that I ever do in my life, and I was right. So that leads me to kind of where I am today. So I was with Privateer Holdings. I helped start and launch a brand called Marley Natural, which is a brand that was a partnership with Bob Marley's family. Ran that for a little bit, and then I started moving more onto the investing side of cannabis. So started with a small venture capital fund called Hyper Ventures, which is $15 million, and we focused on ancillary businesses. So all businesses that aren't involved in cultivation and retail and directly touching the product. So we have 9 investments that actually include Dope Magazine, Headset, Simplify, an insurance business. Willie's Reserve brand is also one of our investments. And then from there, we were thinking about, this was a little over a year ago, we were thinking, what should we do next in the space? And last year was a very different time. Cannabis was not what it looked like now. There weren't all these public companies. It was still really hard to raise money in the space. And so we thought, should we go take another 6 to 12 months, try to raise a $50 to $100 million fund, or do we do some kind of alternative structure? And that's when we came across a structure called a SPAC, which stands for Special Purpose Acquisition Company. The easiest way to describe it without going into a ton of detail, which will probably bore you to death, is that it's kind of like an RTO, which is like a reverse merger, which has been pretty common in Canada. So when you hear of all these different companies that are RTOing in Canada, they're reverse mergering into a shell that already exists. With a SPAC, what's different is that you create the shell, you launch it with a purpose, and that you're going to try to acquire or merge with a specific type of company. You raise the money, you IPO, and then you get a timeline to go and find a company that you want to bring into the shell that eventually takes over your shell. So we're a NASDAQ-listed company. We IPO'd January 30th. We raised $57.5 million with the sole purpose to acquire a company that is ancillary in the cannabis space in the US. So recently, totally gave it away. MTECH announced a merger with MJ Freeway. I also want to point out that Jessica Billingsley, the founder and CEO back there of MJ Freeway, is here tonight. She is a badass. You can talk to her later. So what we'd been looking for was a company that could scale, that had impacted the entire cannabis industry, and would have the opportunity to, really benefit not only from the cash that we were able to put in from a SPAC perspective, which is what MTECH is, but also benefit from a public currency, and really start bringing together various elements of tech and what cannabis needs globally, and bring that under one umbrella. So, I like to say that I think it will be, like an oracle of the cannabis industry, starting with seed to sale technology, which MJ Freeway and Jessica invented. Are people here familiar with seed to sale, what that means? Okay, a couple of people, I see some no, so I'll tell you a little bit. So 5, you're telling me I should keep going?
For 5 minutes,
For 15 more minutes.
For 15 or 25 more minutes.
So very quickly, thank you. I'm just going to take over this thing. So seed to sale technology, cannabis is obviously a highly regulated industry. and will continue to be much more highly regulated. So, we looked at what's a business that will continue to grow and evolve and will actually be critical to compliance and regulatory in the cannabis industry. And MJ Freeway, as the creator of Seed to Sale, it's an 8.5-year-old company. Jessica's been in the industry for 9.5 years, and the business has gone through a variety of iterations, but has grown with the industry. So when you think about businesses that have to, track everything from start to finish, so from the point that a plant is a seed, all the way through to the consumer, this is what MJ Freeway does. There are two products, MJ Platform and Leaf Data Systems. Leaf Data Systems is for governments, so it's used in the state of Washington and the state of Pennsylvania, and MJ Platform is the commercial, and serves really all verticals within cannabis when you think of seed to sale. So for the SPAC team, this was kind of a no-brainer, thinking about what's a core business that you can put as an anchor of this new entity that we're starting that can then add on a variety of different businesses and continue to innovate within the industry, and has really strong leadership and innovators behind it, and would really strongly benefit from being on the NASDAQ. When you look at what public companies are out there right now, by and large, they're all cultivators, either in the US or in Canada. They're all listed in Canada for the most part. And we saw a really interesting opportunity to take a US business to be on a major exchange, so the average person has access to these types of businesses. Because it's really difficult unless you're a high net worth individual, a family office, or a larger fund now to have access to cannabis investing. And not everybody really wants to invest in cultivation. So we thought that this was a really unique way to not only help continue to grow this area of the business, but also to bring something different to retail investors, not only in the US, but globally. So this is what the board's gonna be. Really, I'm just showing you that because I'm up there. No, so what's interesting about this group is that it's a pretty diverse group of people. There are people who have been in cannabis investing. They are mainstream tech investors, lawyers, and bring a really unique perspective to this business. And I also love the fact that it's not all white men, which is something that you don't really see in public companies. Again, kudos to Jessica and the fact that we will have a female CEO on the NASDAQ.
Yeah.
So very excited about that. So on that note, I'll give this microphone back now.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Please give it up to Tahira.